What's up, guys? So with E3 2019 only a week away now, we're getting super close to seeing some exciting trailers and gameplay for some of our most anticipated games this year. And for me personally, my most anticipated game, Cyberpunk 2077, is probably going to have a lot being shown off. So I figured I'd kind of talk with you guys about what I want to see most from the game and what I'm really hoping for most. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. Back in 2018, CD Projekt Red released their first big trailer for Cyberpunk 2077, right at the end of Microsoft's press conference. And while it got everyone super excited and it was pretty hype, a lot of people wanted to see more gameplay and see what the game actually looked like in action. And lo and behold, only a little while after the conference, because of so much uproar in the community, CD Projekt Red went ahead and actually released an almost hour-long gameplay trailer for the game. And in this trailer, we got to see a lot of cool things and a lot of the ideas they had for the game, a lot of the systems in action, really. But they did kind of try to stress that, hey, this was an early build of Cyberpunk and a lot of things were subject to be changed. So what I kind of want to go over with you guys is, what did we see that I really liked, and maybe what did we not see that I'm hoping they can add into the game? And really just overall what I'm hoping this final Cyberpunk 2077 package kind of brings to us when it finally comes out, when I'm expecting to be sometime in 2020. First up, one thing I really liked about the gameplay trailers that we saw was the combat. I never really liked the combat in the Witcher series, and it was actually one of the things that turned me off the most about it and made it kind of hard for me to play their kind of previous entries in the series. But for Cyberpunk, what I was seeing in the gameplay trailer looked super fun. Being able to shoot bullets behind walls, shoot through cover, shoot off enemies' limbs one by one. It all just looked very visceral and kind of like everything had an impact. Hopefully this year at E3, they can maybe show off some new weapons, some new tech, and just some overall new combat systems to even get us more excited than we already are. But really overall, as long as they can keep the combat looking as good as it looked last year, I'd be super happy, especially based on the combat in their previous entries like The Witcher. Also, I'd love to see more of kind of how the tech system works, how you can upgrade your character, what those RPG elements really are like in terms of combat. I'd like to see maybe if there's different branching paths for more stealthy gameplay, or maybe just run and gun. I know they mentioned things like this in the last trailer, but I'd like to see them show it off maybe even a little more to show the variety of gameplay styles and just combat styles that you can have in, depending on the player who's playing. For example, one thing they showed in the trailer last year was actually they kind of hacked around a system to get through a door in order to get to the next part of the mission. And this kind of got me really excited because I've always liked the idea of kind of what the Deus Ex games do. And that's saying, hey, you can either run in and shoot everyone up and just blast right through the front door, or you can try and, kind of figure out a smart way to get around, either going through the vents or hacking into a system and getting in that way. And I've always loved that in the Deus Ex games, and seeing that kind of gameplay style and mythology kind of come into the Cyberpunk world really got me excited, and I'd love to see how they can maybe elaborate on that as well. Maybe with new hacking systems, maybe new ways you can manipulate enemies and the environment to your advantage. Just things like that in general that give off a big Deus Ex vibe that I think would fit really well within the Cyberpunk universe. Another thing that I thought looked really good in last year's gameplay trailer was actually just the world building. Walking it down outside that elevator when you first land on the bottom floor and just seeing tons of people in the crowd everywhere walking, looking like they're doing their own thing, all looking completely individual. That was super awesome and super exciting. They even touched on it specifically in the trailer. And it really did lend itself to creating this living, breathing world that so many games kind of claim to say they have, but it looks like Cyberpunk might be one of the only games that actually can pull it off. Walking by, police investigations and them scanning things on the ground, really anything like that, or just walking through a market and seeing everyone buying things and talking and fighting and discussing. Things like that are just awesome in general because it makes you feel more like you're in this world of Cyberpunk, and it really lends itself to a role-playing, agenda. Hopefully the team over at CD Projekt Red has been able to expand even more on this world with all the extra time they've had. And I'm hoping any gameplay we see this year just really solidifies the idea that this is going to be a living, breathing world that you can just get lost in for hours and hours. Because I think overall, that's what most people are kind of hoping for based on CD Projekt's, last games. Speaking of the world, though, one thing that I did think was a little lacking in last year's gameplay trailer was the dialogue. So I know a lot of people have kind of mentioned this and talked about it, but V's kind of direct companions throughout this whole gameplay piece were at times a little bit corny, and they just weren't that endearing to me. I found the world very exciting, as I've already said, but the actual characters that were in it seemed kind of bland and a little too much like just, movie tropes. They didn't really have their own flavor and spice to them. Luckily though, because the game was still in early development, I'm hoping that they can kind of expand on this dialogue and maybe, progress the story to a little more mature spot, kind of like The Witcher was. And I have no, problems with thinking that they won't pull this off, because their last games, The Witcher, were very mature and had very good themes, very good stories. So I think this year we'll see maybe an improved version of the dialogue systems that we saw before. Another thing I'd really like to see too is just a more in-depth look at the character creation. Last year, they kind of touched on the character creation and said it would be very in-depth, and you could, create your own V, your own character that would look and have their own specific backstory. But hopefully this year we can get kind of a deep dive into what that really means and how your backstory can affect the story overall. And another thing on that is I've seen games do backstories before, but I hope it doesn't boil down to, choose option 1, 2, or 3, and there's maybe a few different dialogue choices here and there in the main story. I hope you can kind of more in-depthly craft how your character got to the point where they are, and maybe that can have a big effect on the world around you. This would really lend itself to, an awesome role-playing experience, which, as I said before, is something I think a lot of the CD Projekt Red fans are looking for. On top of that, I think one thing that everyone really wants to see more of is some just more visceral and intense nighttime combat. We saw some more nighttime gameplay in the last gameplay trailer, but what I would think we were all really hoping for, especially in the reveal trailer, was some gritty nighttime gameplay with maybe neon lights everywhere and like cars flying around and guns going off and all the light refracting off all the puddles, things like that. I think that's how most people envisioned Cyberpunk before CD Projekt unveiled it. And while it was kind of a big hit to a lot of people, seeing that there was so much light and almost happiness in the world, I think it's grown on people. But now we do want to see, hey, that vision of Cyberpunk that we all think of when we think of Cyberpunk. That kind of Blade Runner-esque, dark, dystopian world where people are on the undergrounds and there's just lights everywhere and darkness. And I think you guys catch my drift. I'm hoping maybe we can see a little more of that, just to be reassured that we will have some awesome standard Cyberpunk moments on top of, the good old sunny California weather. But yeah, guys, that's overall my feelings on the main things we saw of the trailer. I think overall, for me, what I want to see out of this Cyberpunk game is almost a Deus Ex-like game with a ton of decision-making and story and RPG elements, but in the Cyberpunk universe with kind of that CD Projekt flair. And obviously, as I stated, much better combat than really either of those studios' previous games. I think that this year could really show that Cyberpunk 2077 could really live up to all the hype it's been generating over these past few years. And even though I think it won't be releasing this year and probably maybe even later in 2020, especially with delays likely incoming, I think overall this game could be huge and super exciting. And I'm just hoping that their vision that they showed last year can be refined in such a way that it just really lives up to all the hype. But yeah, guys, thanks for watching, and I really hope you guys are as excited to see what Cyberpunk 2077 brings to E3 this year as I am. But, either way, I think it's going to be a really good year for all the games in general, and I am really excited for next week. On top of that, if you guys do want to see more content of me playing live and just looking fucking dope, just feel free to check me out on twitch.tv/FranklyGaming. Yikes.